Hey everyone, Allison Kinnear. Today we are talking about courageous conversations. My intention for this is to talk about life in regards to self-doubt, in regards to confidence, in regards to just how we support one another in the workplace and maybe sometimes even outside of the workplace. But these are the conversations that I wanted to have that helps us step into our authentic courage as much as possible with everyday people living everyday lives and those little moments that show up that kind of helps us reflect and maybe step into something new. So today I'm joined by the amazing Julie Taheri. Julie, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And I'm really happy to be having this conversation with you today. So one of the things we talked before we got on here. And one of the things that you were telling me about was a time in your life when you were one of very few women in a meeting with about 40 men,
Yeah.
and a little thought kind of flew into your mind at that in that moment.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. It's that fleeting moment of looking around and seeing very few people that are like you in some ways. And it's a very, very large group of people that have something in common that you do not share with them. And it's really easy to let that moment make you feel uncomfortable because it makes you, I think, subconsciously wonder if you should be there.
Mhm.
So there's certainly that fleeting moment of, do I actually belong here? Like, did I do something to right to get here? How did this happen?
Yeah. What did you do? Well, let me ask you, does that happen very often, or was that more of because of the stakes of the meeting? It happened.
It happened earlier, I think earlier in my career, particularly when I first moved into leadership, and was at not so much within my own function, but broader leadership meetings and such, where it was heavily, heavily represented by men. And I think looking at some of the workshops that I did where it was for all of the leaders in the company that day, it was heavily, heavily attended by mostly men, usually facilitated by a woman. And I was sitting in there as one of the only, if not the only, on a few occasions, woman.
Yeah. 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 What do you do to navigate that? Because, and first of all, just to say statistic, like there's so many studies out there that show that if you are the only whatever identity you hold that may be different from everybody else in the room, that thought is going to fly in
Yep.
and be activated. And so what do you do in those moments to kind of help yourself shift out of it?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, I remind myself that I worked really hard to get there, and I'm sure other people in the room did too. And that had nothing to do, that particular kind of self-talk, that had nothing to do with comparing genders. That had to do with, we worked really hard to get where we were. And it was maybe a moment of actually self-celebration for a brief second that I did get there. But it does feel a little uncomfortable giving yourself that moment. And I mean, at least for me, it does at times. But I remind myself that I didn't randomly just get selected out of a hat to do this. Like, I worked really, really hard to do what I do.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you mentioned in our conversation earlier about how you go through the data points to
Yeah.
help yourself remember that. Like, I did this,
Yep.
I did that.
Yep.
Is that
So
right?
I'll remind myself of, the roles that I've had, the things that I've done, some of the successes and wins that I've had in my career. And those are certainly combined with things that haven't gone as well as I would have hoped. But I do remind myself that, like, there are times that teams that I've led have broken some significant records, for example. There are things that I can point to that, as a one-off, maybe it's a coincidence, but if I can point to several of them, I feel like it's a moment of empowerment of, I'm not perfect, but maybe I'm decent enough to be sitting here. I've earned this place.
Yes, yes. What I love about what you're saying, Julie, is so often like arts, when that thought of, I don't know if I belong here comes in, it can kind of like take your peripheral vision and just shrink it into, you're right, I don't belong. And what you're describing is going, wait a second, let's remember, I
Yep.
did this. I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. And like the perspective kind of zooms back out. And you can go,
Yeah.
I'm not perfect, I'm not great at everything, but remembering all the things that you did helps kind of keep that perspective balanced.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's that I find it also like combats the negative bias in our brain to only remember the bad stuff.
Yeah.
Like when you can celebrate like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you celebrate often?
Uh, Sometimes it's probably one of my weaknesses actually is celebration and recognition. And it is something that, I'll take a moment to say this feels really good. And then what's next?
Yeah.
And sometimes sometimes that is a perfectly appropriate response. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's nowhere near an appropriate response for something. For example, a record-breaking moment should probably be celebrated more than a quick congratulations, good job, pat on the back. So I think that's probably one of my lifelong learning journeys as kind of as a person, as myself, as a leader as well.
Mhm.
Like those things should be celebrated.
Do you do you allow other people to celebrate you?
I am
Like,
really
how
bad at
is that? You're really bad at that?
I'm really bad at that.
What happens when
I'm
people
very
acknowledge you?
uncomfortable. I don't love the spotlight of recognition. It is, as much as I appreciate how respectful and how honoring those moments are meant to be, I would much prefer a quick one-to-one note or email that does not put me in front of anybody.
Gotcha. And is it easier to hear when it's like in writing or just
Yes.
even personally given?
Yes.
Do you believe it when it comes in that way?
I believe it both ways, but I don't feel like I have eyes on me when I'm reading it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a great distinction, right? Because some people maybe can hear it even in a one-on-one setting and kind of go, are they being serious or not? You know, or doubt it. But I'm hearing it's really the way it's given. If it's too public, that's really uncomfortable, and that may be uncomfortable due to the publicity
Yeah.
as opposed to the acknowledgement.
Yeah, for sure. And I think as a leader, one thing that I've always done, or early on, as in my career as a leader, I gather some information from everybody who's either joining my team or being transitioned into my teams. And one of the first things I ask them is how they like to be recognized, because I think it's really easy to make assumptions that, well, everybody would love to be called on stage and be applauded. Very much not true.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's an important thing to get to know. I think about it sometimes in the terms of, just because it's a framework that's helpful, of love languages, not necessarily in terms of relationship, but definitely at work. Like some people love words of affirmation, and it's like, well, is that public or is that private? Some people love when they're like, I don't care how many words you tell me, I want the recognition, or I want the money, or I want the badge, or some, it's like, okay, well, that's just gifts. You know what I mean? Like there's all these other ways that people like to receive it, and we can't make assumptions.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me what it's like to work. I've had this conversation with you, and I've had it with other folks about working, especially in the higher levels of leadership, working with other women as opposed to working with other men, and what shows up amongst those gender dynamics that can happen, especially when I think it happens more often. You know, I used to work in a field that was very female heavy. And so I didn't get this as much as I've seen it play out when there are fewer women in leadership positions, as opposed to where like pretty much everybody, not just everybody in leadership, but like when it's a predominantly female led,
Yeah.
industry. So what is your experience with that?
Yeah. So interestingly, I've had some really interesting experiences across that, where I found that I I feel like we're, as women in leadership or women in roles in general, I feel like we're almost forgetting to include the notion that there's a lot of men who are allies to women. And I've been really fortunate where there have been a lot of allies that I've had who have been both male and female.
Mhm.
I think that there is a different dynamic that makes it a more delicate situation of what is and isn't appropriate. And I've not super recently, but in my career, I've worked with women who have had, myself never having had this notion, but other women who have, which is we need to surround ourselves and, we need to support other women and we don't need to include the men in anything. And I think it's been an oversight, because I think we need to include everybody, just like I think groups of men need to include groups of women need to include groups of men. There's actually, or any gender identity of any kind, there's groupings that are unnecessary, that are almost hyper focused on. And I feel like we're doing everybody a disservice by not allowing one human to be as supportive as another. I think that there is a beautiful outcome when everybody is genuinely invested in one another and one's own success and development.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's the common factor right there.
Yes.
It's like ensuring that everyone is invested in each other's success, that the
Yes.
success of each person in the room means the success of the overall mission or whatever it is that everybody is there together to work upon.
Yeah.
What does allyship look like for you? Like successful allyship, regardless of who it's coming from.
Yeah.
What does that look like for you?
I think so. I know there's some really very specific definitions that are used across mentorship or coaching or allyship and whatever you want to call it. I think to me, there's a couple of things that are consistent across all of those. And that is people show up, whether or not the person who needs it is asking for it, they can tell. Like there are people, they're invested and they show up because they're invested. They can tell if something is maybe at a place where you're stuck and you don't know how to fix it. They can pick up on the cues. And this is not because they're, obsessively monitoring or observing your behavior by any means, but more so they may have heard you say, I'm not sure what to do next. And these people will proactively reach out and say, I heard you say you didn't know what to do next. Do you want to chat through this? Yeah. And making that space and being proactive and allowing for the back and forth without having any self-motivation to where the net result is. And that's the part where this is not, it needs to be selfless for it to actually work. And that's where the beautiful outcomes again come in, is when, as a leader, you have to make calls sometimes that are tough. And the people who are trying to influence you to make them in a way that benefits them, those are not allies. Those are not people who are there to facilitate any kind of problem solving or objective discussion. They're there for self-serving purposes. The people who are there and they show up to help you solve that problem, whatever that outcome might look like, and putting aside how it might impact them personally, that's what actually is important.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing in all of that, and this goes, I think the very first thing you said is kind of an indication of what people's motives are, is they said, I heard you say this, and maybe even reflecting back, not even what was said, but sometimes even what was underneath what was said.
Yeah.
And then saying, would you like some help with that? Like asking the permission before diving in and saying, well, then you should blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean? Like there is a permission that is asked at the beginning that says, I heard this. I'm wondering if you'd like any support around that. That question already kind of disarms everything, because it shows that they're not there's a little bit of a suspension of judgment.
Yep.
Going.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm thinking back, there have been, I've had some tough meetings in my career, and I've had follow-ups from people that have they've really been spread across the board across, there's the ones who will come up and say, I kind of heard something's a little bit odd. Do you want to talk through it? Do you want to just have a sounding board?
Yeah.
And in the same meeting, the same folks there, so they heard the same message theoretically, because it was being delivered by me. I'll get a response. Well, here's what I'm thinking we should do. And here's what needs to happen. And very much there's no permission asked. It's let me solve your problem for you. And that's not actually helpful. And that's not actually coaching or allyship whatsoever. That's very much a, let me tell you what I want.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a judgment in there too.
Yes.
I feel like when people just, that's that unsolicited advice thing. It's saying, I'm judging that you have a problem or there's something wrong here, and that I'm going to be the one who can help you solve it, as opposed to just even pausing and asking permission, and genuine permission. Because
Yes.
when it's like, no, I think I'm good, and they go, well, I was just, it's like,
Yeah. Like, no, I'm good. I've already
no.
made the call. I appreciate it, but, and it's good to hear out maybe what they have to say, because
Yes.
maybe they have thought about something from a different perspective. And it's my job at that point to be objective and listen to it. But that's still not allyship.
That's right. That's right. And in all honesty, how often when somebody goes, would you like, and then you say no, and then they give it anyway, how often is that feedback actually been helpful?
Very rarely.
Very rarely.
Yeah. It can be
Not
on
to say
occasion.
never.
Not never. And it's particularly helpful if maybe someone has experienced something that you didn't know, maybe, so that they, in their past, that they've faced a similar problem. And so they want to share that. But again, in those cases, they usually preface with,
That's right.
when I was at this place, I experienced something similar. If I could give a suggestion, here you go.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you say to any, lately I've been talking to very young women just starting off in their college careers and looking to get into business and leadership. If you had any advice around, especially the ones that are finding themselves wanting to get into fields that where they don't see reflections of themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
What words would you want to share? And maybe it's words you would share with your younger self, as well.
Yeah. There's so many things. I'm going to just start rattling off a number of things, because I don't know that I have one particularly North Star guiding principle here, but
go for it.
What I will say is, this is tricky because it's simultaneous. Believe in yourself, but stay humble. And that's really hard to do, because sometimes you have to give yourself a pep talk where you really, really focus on how good you are. And it's easy to let that take over, that humility. Mm-hmm. And I promise that very few people will be served well by that. The humility is really important. In my experience, actually, the higher up you get, the more important the humility becomes.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing. Another is, if someone is willing to invest in you and mentor you, even if it's tough love type of mentorship, but you can tell they're taking the time that they don't have to spend with you, take it, listen. It may not be exactly how you turn out or what will influence every minute, but it will be valuable and invaluable in many cases. And I've had some very tough mentors who have been very good at driving me when I've been stuck.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let me rephrase that. Getting me to drive myself when I've been stuck. So and the other thing is, don't be afraid to change your mind. As we grow, don't be afraid to believe something new. It's okay. You might go into your field adamant that you think this way, and a few years into it, feel like you are being entirely disingenuous because you don't have this deep, passionate attachment to that thing anymore. And you start second guessing yourself and your sanity, and you wonder if you even belong in that field in the first place. I've seen this time and time again. It's okay to evolve. That's actually something that's beautiful. And it gives you a deeper understanding of, what was it that made me feel so deeply passionate? And what have I learned? Why have I evolved this way? And it's okay to try new things. It's okay to be afraid. It's not okay to be afraid and not try.
Yeah. And that to me cycles back to trust yourself and yet stay humble. I mean, when I remember hearing, something is really true when the opposite of it is just as true. It's like, what is really true is really believe in yourself. And what is also really true is to stay humble and open to growing and learning and evolving and being wrong. And, as it goes, I think what you just said about the higher up you go, the more humble you need to be. I think it's an interesting thing, because I think in the beginning of one's career, it's almost like it's important to be humble because you're learning. And then it becomes important to believe in yourself really strongly, because sometimes at certain times, while still being open to feedback and whatnot, but that belief in yourself becomes really important. And then that sometimes rockets you to upper leadership when then you have to go back to being humble again. It's like it's an interesting evolution there.
It is. And I think the other part of that is the higher you go to leadership, the less directly connected you are with the actual work that a lot of the people that you are overseeing are doing day to day. And so it's very easy to make the assumption that that senior leader has no understanding of what this function or job is like anymore. And I feel like the most effective leaders are the ones who, in spite of maybe it having been 10 years since they've done that work themselves, they can still jump in and do it, or they're eager to learn and seek to understand how things are changing. They don't assume that they know everything.
Yeah.
And it's easy to, once you become in a senior leadership role and kind of become that person, I think it's easy, probably more subconsciously than anything, to present yourself and maybe even to some extent believe that you really do know everything about something. And there's no way you do, because just like we evolve in our belief system, functions evolve, systems evolve. I mean, technology evolves. And as you know, you and I share younger children, they teach us things on technology. Like there's a reason things have evolved, and we have to be receptive to learning them, or we can be stuck in our ways. And that's where I think you'll get leaders who don't always solicit a great level of respect from their organizations and from the people that they oversee at times when they have refused to evolve.
Yeah. And isn't that what it's about? The confidence or the swagger that's kind of stuck in time versus the humbleness and willingness to evolve and grow and shift and change and move with the rest of life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huge. Thank you so much, Julie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Appreciate you being here and sharing your wisdom, and
Yeah.
we will pause here, and more courageous conversations to come.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.